There are traditions that people repeat without questioning. Gestures inherited, symbols placed inside homes, customs performed year after year with the belief that they are harmless, decorative, or merely cultural. Yet ancient wisdom teaches something unsettling. Not everything that feels familiar is spiritually neutral, and not everything that looks beautiful is aligned with blessing. If you have ever wondered why some doors seem harder to open, why effort does not always translate into abundance, or why prosperity feels delayed despite your work and intention, this message may not be accidental. Wisdom, older than empires, teaches that wealth does not begin in the hands, it begins in alignment, and alignment begins inside the home. Before we go deeper, if you value teachings that uncover hidden spiritual principles preserved through Jewish wisdom, Torah insight, and ancient revelation, I invite you to subscribe to the Jewish Wisdom channel. Your support allows these teachings to continue reaching those who are ready to see beyond the surface. And before a single secret is unveiled, write this sentence in the comments with intention, not as superstition, but as alignment. My home is aligned with blessing. Words spoken consciously shape the inner world long before the outer world responds. From the earliest pages of scripture, the home is not presented as a neutral space. In Hebrew thought, a house is not just shelter, it is a spiritual vessel, a mikdash miat, a small sanctuary. What enters a home does not stay silent. It speaks, it influences, it either harmonizes with divine order or subtly disrupts it. This is why ancient Israel was instructed with precision about what objects belonged inside sacred space and which did not. Not because God feared objects, but because humans are shaped by symbols more than they realize. What we see daily becomes what we normalize. What we normalize slowly becomes what we embody. Modern culture often dismisses this as primitive thinking. Yet neuroscience confirms what the sages already knew. Repeated symbols shape perception, emotion, and behavior. And perception shapes destiny. In Jewish wisdom, prosperity is never disconnected from consciousness. Wealth is not merely currency, it is flow. The Hebrew word for blessing, barakah, implies movement, increase, continuity. When flow is blocked, the sages never ask first about effort. They ask about alignment. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. The doorway is not poetic language. It is spiritual geography. What stands inside a home represents what that household honors, remembers, and submits to often unconsciously. And this is where ancient wisdom becomes uncomfortable for modern ears. Because Jewish tradition has always been deeply cautious about adopting symbols whose origins, meanings, and spiritual roots do not align with Torah consciousness. Not out of fear, but out of spiritual precision. The sages understood something that has been forgotten. Intention does not erase origin. And decoration does not neutralize symbolism. From the perspective of Torah, symbols are not empty. They carry memory, they carry energy, they carry spiritual lineage. This is why the prophets repeatedly warned Israel not merely about idols, but about foreign practices adopted casually. The danger was never the object alone. It was the slow erosion of identity and alignment. A tree, in Jewish symbolism, is never neutral. The tree of life represents divine wisdom. The tree of knowledge represents choice, desire, and consequence. Trees in scripture are covenants, altars, genealogies, and sometimes warnings. To place a tree at the center of the home is, symbolically, to enthrone something. The question has never been decoration. The question is what that symbol represents in the spiritual economy of the house. Yet this message is not about condemnation. It is about awareness. Many people unknowingly invite spiritual contradiction into their homes while praying for clarity, peace, and abundance. They ask heaven to bless a space that is spiritually confused. And confusion always leaks into outcomes. Jewish wisdom teaches that poverty is not always lack of money. Sometimes poverty is leakage. Energy flowing out faster than it flows in. Effort without retention. Income without stability. Blessing without permanence. The sages say, when blessing enters a house and finds no vessel prepared to hold it, it departs quietly. This is why ancient households were intentional, not obsessive, intentional. They knew that prosperity responds to order, and order is not control. Order is harmony. At this stage, nothing has been fully revealed yet. Only attention has been placed gently in the air. A question rather than an accusation. A pause rather than a verdict. Because true wisdom does not shout. It waits for the listener to lean forward. And if something inside you feels unsettled, curious, or alert right now, it is not fear. it is recognition. The soul recognizes patterns long before the mind agrees. What ancient Jewish wisdom reveals about symbols, prosperity, and spiritual alignment is far deeper than cultural debate. It touches identity, memory, and covenant. And once understood, it cannot be unseen. For now, let this rest quietly in your awareness, not as judgment, as preparation, because what is about to be revealed next was never meant to be common knowledge. In ancient Hebrew thought, nothing that stands at the center of life is accidental. The Torah does not begin with laws. It begins with order, with separation, with discernment, light from darkness, sacred from common, blessing from confusion. This pattern is not theological poetry. It is a spiritual operating system. When the book of Genesis describes creation, it does not merely describe what God made. It reveals how reality functions. And one of the earliest principles established is this: alignment precedes abundance. Chaos never produces lasting blessing. The sages noticed something subtle. Before humanity was given dominion, before fruitfulness was commanded, before multiplication was promised, there was definition, boundaries, meaning, identity. Without these, power becomes destructive and blessing dissolves into loss. This is why Jewish wisdom is extremely attentive to symbols, seasons, and borrowed practices. Not because the sages feared the world, but because they understood spiritual resonance. The Torah repeatedly warns Israel not against other nations themselves, but against adopting their sacred symbols and ritual meanings. Do not learn their ways, the text says, not because the ways are foreign, but because they are spiritually misaligned. What a culture treats as sacred shapes how its people understand life, value, and prosperity. In Hebrew scripture, the concept of the tree is never decorative, it is covenantal. In Genesis, the tree of life represents divine flow, eternal vitality, and wisdom rooted in God. The tree of knowledge represents autonomy without alignment, desire without restraint, and wisdom detached from divine order. One tree sustains life, the other introduces fracture. This is not coincidence. Jewish tradition teaches that symbols imprint the soul. What is repeatedly honored in the home trains the inner world of those who live there. Rabbinic writings explain that prosperity flows where divine order is acknowledged. This is why blessing in the Torah is always conditional on alignment, not effort alone. If you walk in my statutes, I will give rain in its season. Rain is not random, it responds to order. Now consider this carefully. When an object rooted in another spiritual narrative is placed at the center of the home, even unintentionally, it introduces mixed signals into the spiritual environment. The house begins to speak two languages at once: covenant and contradiction, identity and imitation. The problem is not celebration. The problem is confusion. Jewish wisdom teaches that wealth is sensitive. Blessing is shy. It does not remain where identity is blurred. The Talmud states that the divine presence rests only where there is clarity of purpose. Where values are diluted, presence withdraws gently, without drama. This is why the prophets were relentless about removing foreign symbols from Israelite homes and public spaces. Not because wood and stone had power, but because the human heart absorbs meaning through symbols long before it understands theology. The sages explain that this verse is not about morality alone. It is about alignment. What stands before your eyes daily stands before your soul. In Jewish mystical understanding, the home functions like a spiritual field. Everything placed inside it emits influence. Some objects strengthen flow, others weaken it. Some clarify intention, others scatter it. Prosperity does not survive in scattered environments. This is why Jewish homes are intentionally marked. A mezuzah on the doorpost is not decoration. It is a declaration. It states what this house serves, remembers, and aligns with. It defines spiritual jurisdiction. Where jurisdiction is unclear, blessing hesitates. The ancient rabbis taught that adopting symbols without understanding their roots creates spiritual debt, not punishment. Debt, energy imbalance. The household unknowingly supports a narrative that does not nourish its own destiny. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. Poverty, in Jewish wisdom, is often the result of spiritual misalignment rather than lack of effort. A person can work endlessly and still feel drained. Money can enter and leave without explanation. Opportunities can appear and dissolve. This is not coincidence, it is leakage. The Zohar explains that blessing flows like water through a channel. If the channel is cracked, the water does not disappear violently, it seeps away quietly, and the person wonders why they are always starting over. This teaching was never meant to shame. It was meant to protect. Jewish wisdom does not ask people to reject others' joy. It asks them to guard their own covenant. Identity is not exclusion. Identity is clarity. The moment a home becomes spiritually clear, blessing recognizes where it belongs. And this is why ancient wisdom insists that prosperity begins, not with rituals for money, but with removing contradiction, clearing space, choosing alignment over imitation, consciousness over habit. What you honor shapes what you attract. What you normalize shapes what you keep. And what your home silently declares determines which spiritual forces feel welcome to remain. This truth has been preserved quietly, passed from teacher to student, from generation to generation, not shouted in public squares. Because wisdom knows it cannot be forced, it must be recognized. It is remembrance. Under Jewish wisdom, revelation is never given to impress the mind alone. Truth that cannot be lived becomes noise. What has been uncovered now must descend from understanding into action. Because in Hebrew, thought, wisdom that remains abstract, does not complete its purpose. The sages say that light only fulfills its mission when it finds a vessel willing to carry it. This is where many people misunderstand spiritual teaching. They search for techniques to attract money, formulas to unlock success, or rituals to force outcomes. But ancient wisdom moves in the opposite direction. It teaches that prosperity responds to inner order before outer action. When the inner world shifts, the outer world reorganizes itself naturally. The first application of this teaching is not removal, but awareness. Jewish practice always begins with consciousness. Before changing the home, one must change the gaze. Look at your living space not as furniture and decoration, but as a spiritual environment. Ask quietly what this space teaches you every day, what values it reinforces, what stories it tells without words. The sages taught that a home educates its inhabitants constantly. Even silence instructs. Even objects preach. This is why prosperity is often inherited unconsciously. Children raised in aligned environments absorb clarity, stability, and confidence without being taught directly. Likewise, confusion reproduces itself silently. To apply this wisdom, one does not begin with judgment or fear. One begins with intention. Intention is the gate through which blessing recognizes permission to enter. Set aside a moment, preferably in stillness, and declare inwardly that your home exists to support life, peace, clarity, and blessing. Not allowed for performance, but internally for alignment. In Jewish tradition, intention sanctifies action. Without intention, even correct actions remain hollow. With intention, even small changes carry great weight. Once intention is clear, the next step is alignment. Alignment is not about rejecting people or cultures. It is about choosing coherence. A coherent home speaks one spiritual language. When symbols, practices, and values point in the same direction, energy stops leaking. This does not require dramatic gestures. Often, it requires quiet decisions. What you place at the center of your home matters. What you elevate visually matters. What you normalize season after season matters. Prosperity is sensitive to hierarchy. What is central shapes what flows. Jewish wisdom teaches that blessing enters through order. Order is not rigidity. It is harmony between meaning and action. When the meaning of the home aligns with the values you ask heaven to bless, abundance feels invited rather than forced. This is why many who struggle financially feel relief before results. The moment alignment begins, anxiety softens, confusion lifts, the soul senses coherence returning, and the soul always knows before the bank account shows. Another practical application is speech. The sages insist that words spoken inside the home either anchor a blessing or weaken it. Complaints repeated daily create an atmosphere of scarcity. Fear spoken casually trains the nervous system to expect lack. Gratitude spoken intentionally creates expansion. This is why, at this point, write this sentence in the comments, slowly and consciously. Not as superstition, but as declaration. My home supports clarity, peace, and abundance. Writing it externalizes intention. It gives form to alignment. Jewish wisdom understands that written words carry weight because they crystallize thought into reality. The application continues in rhythm, not rush. Do not seek to control outcomes. Seek to remove contradiction. The Torah never commands Israel to chase blessing. It commands Israel to walk correctly. Blessing follows naturally. When alignment increases, opportunities begin to feel less forced. Decisions become clearer. Energy stabilizes. Money stops slipping away inexplicably. Relationships around work and provision soften. These shifts are subtle but cumulative. The rabbis taught that wealth is a companion that only stays where it feels respected. Respect, in this sense, means clarity. A clear vessel honors what it receives by holding it well. And here lies another application, often overlooked: generosity. Jewish wisdom connects generosity directly to flow, but not as transaction. Giving releases attachment to fear. When fear loosens, flow increases. A home aligned with blessing does not cling, it circulates. Even modest generosity, when done consciously, signals to the spiritual realm that this household trusts flow, rather than hoards out of anxiety. Trust attracts continuity. This teaching is not about abandoning joy or celebration. It is about grounding joy in identity. Joy that flows from coherence nourishes. Joy borrowed without alignment drains. The sages say that peace in the home is the strongest magnet for blessing. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of shared meaning. When meaning is shared, even challenges become productive. As these applications settle into daily life, something important happens. Prosperity stops feeling distant. It becomes relational. It responds. It listens. It feels welcomed rather than demanded. And this is the quiet power of ancient Jewish wisdom. It does not promise instant riches. It restores conditions where blessing can remain. When alignment is restored, effort multiplies instead of exhausts. Time feels cooperative instead of hostile. Money feels like a tool instead of a test. And the soul, finally, feels at home. There is a story told quietly among the elders, not as history to be proven, but as truth to be recognized. It speaks of a man who worked hard all his life and never understood why stability escaped him. His hands were skilled, his intentions honest, his effort relentless. Yet money arrived only to disappear. Peace visited only briefly. Opportunity came close and then withdrew, as if something unseen kept closing the gate just as it opened. One evening, after another long day that yielded little, he sat alone in his home, not in despair, but in exhaustion. And for the first time, he looked at his surroundings, not with familiarity, but with awareness. He noticed how the center of his home carried symbols he had never chosen consciously. Objects placed by habit, traditions repeated without reflection, decorations inherited, copied, normalized. None of them evil, none of them intentional, yet none of them rooted in who he truly was. In that moment, something subtle shifted. Not fear, not guilt. Recognition. Jewish wisdom teaches that recognition is the beginning of return. Teshuvah does not start with regret. It starts with clarity. The moment a person sees without defense, the soul realigns. The man did not rush to change anything that night. He simply sat in silence and asked one honest question. What story does my home tell about what I serve? That question alone began to soften something tight inside him. Days passed. Small decisions followed. Not dramatic, not announced. Just gentle realignment. Objects were moved. Focus shifted. Intention clarified. The home began to feel quieter, lighter, more coherent. And with that coherence came an unexpected emotion. Relief. This is what Jewish tradition means when it speaks of peace in the home. Not aesthetic perfection. Not religious performance. Peace as alignment. Peace as the absence of inner contradiction. Soon after, changes began to ripple outward. Not miracles shouted from rooftops, but doors opening without resistance. Conversations flowing instead of stalling. Money staying longer than usual. Decisions feeling cleaner. Sleep deeper. The man did not become suddenly wealthy. He became stable. And stability is the soil where abundance grows. The sages say that when the soul stops fighting itself, heaven stops resisting the person. This teaching matters because so many people carry silent confusion. They pray for blessing while hosting contradiction. They ask for increase while honoring symbols that speak a different spiritual language. And the soul feels the dissonance even when the mind ignores it. Prosperity, in Jewish wisdom, is relational. It responds to environments where it feels understood, where values are not mixed, where intention is not divided. If this message touches something personal in you, allow yourself to feel it without defensiveness. There is no accusation here, only invitation. Ancient wisdom does not seek to shame. It seeks to restore. Take a moment now and answer honestly in the comments. Not for others, but for yourself. Write what you desire most for your home right now. Peace, stability, clarity, abundance, or simply alignment. Writing it anchors awareness into reality. And as you reflect, remember this: change does not need to be loud to be powerful. Alignment does not need to be public to be real. Heaven responds to sincerity long before it responds to performance. If this teaching is resonating with you and you feel drawn to go deeper, there is a resource created precisely for this journey. The Jewish Wisdom eBook on Abundant Prosperity explores these principles with depth, stories, and practical insight rooted in ancient teachings. It is not about chasing wealth, but about restoring the conditions where blessing can dwell. If you feel called, you will find a link in the description of this video or in the first pinned comment. Let it be a companion, not a command. Wisdom always waits for readiness. And let this be sealed gently in your heart. When a home becomes clear, blessing knows where to rest. This is why the Torah places such immense weight on remembrance. Not memory as nostalgia, but remembrance as identity. Remember who you are before you remember what you want. Remember where blessing truly comes from before you ask for more. Remember what you stand for before you stand for results. In Jewish wisdom, forgetting is not a minor flaw. Forgetting is spiritual erosion. It dissolves orientation. It blurs purpose. And when purpose becomes blurred, even blessing loses its address. The sages teach that sin disrupts behavior, but forgetting disrupts being. A person who forgets their identity begins to borrow meaning from outside sources. Slowly, unconsciously, they adopt symbols, values, and narratives that do not nourish their soul. This is how confusion enters quietly. Not through rebellion, but through neglect. Not through rejection of truth, but through distraction from it. Identity is not ego. Identity is alignment. It is knowing where you stand so clearly that life knows how to meet you. Identity creates coherence, and coherence is the vessel that can hold blessing without spilling it. Without identity, abundance leaks. With identity, even modest provision multiplies. As this message gently settles, allow yourself to release pressure. Pressure belongs to striving. Gratitude belongs to alignment. Gratitude is not pretending everything is perfect. Gratitude is recognizing that something is already rearranging itself beneath the surface. It is the emotional signature of readiness. When gratitude appears before evidence, it signals trust. And trust prepares the ground long before the seed breaks the soil. Nothing external needs to change immediately for something internal to be restored. The soul often heals before circumstances respond. This is not delay, this is order. Jewish wisdom understands that the unseen realigns first, and the visible follows in its proper time. If you feel drawn to do so, write this declaration quietly in the comments. Not for visibility, not for validation, but as a personal seal of clarity, spoken once with sincerity rather than repeated with urgency. I choose alignment over confusion, and blessing recognizes my home. Let these words rest gently. Do not rush them. Do not perform them. Let them stand as intention rather than demand. Understand this deeply. Transformation does not always feel intense. True change often feels calm. It feels like exhaling after holding tension for too long. It feels like stability returning. It feels like coming home to oneself after wandering without realizing it. If this teaching has touched something in you, if it has brought clarity, relief, or even a quiet sense of correction without shame, honor that moment. Wisdom does not isolate. It invites companionship. Growth unfolds best when guided, not forced. For those who feel called to continue this journey, the Jewish Wisdom eBook on Abundant Prosperity was created as a companion, not a promise. It explores these principles with depth, context, and ancient insight, helping restore the conditions where blessing can dwell naturally rather than be chased anxiously. You will find a link waiting in the description of this video or in the first pinned comment, whenever readiness meets curiosity. And now, let this message be sealed softly, without urgency, without fear, without strain. Blessing does not avoid you. It is not withheld in judgment. It waits for coherence. And when coherence returns, abundance no longer hesitates.